F and E in the booklet that's in front of you. And just identify, orient the board and the audience as to what those exhibits are.
I'm sorry, exhibits E and F?
I'm sorry, F and G.
F and G. So exhibit F is the agenda for the policy subcommittee meeting held on August 19th, 2021. And exhibit G are minutes from that meeting.
And when we broke last time, we were talking about the August 19th meeting in 2021 of the policy subcommittee of the Barrington School Committee. Do you recollect that discussion?
Yes.
And exhibits F and G are what? You could identify those again.
Yes, the exhibit F is the agenda for the policy subcommittee meeting on August 19th, and exhibit G is our minutes from that meeting.
And at that meeting, did the policy subcommittee make amendments to the COVID-19 policy from the prior year?
There was a draft of the COVID-19 policy with amendments made to the previous year's policy.
So when we began the meeting, there were already some amendments started.
Yes.
And what were those amendments that appeared at the start of the meeting?
The beginning of the policy, sort of the preamble to the policy was added to reflect the current status of the pandemic. And there was wording for a face mask and vaccine mandate.
And during that meeting, did the group make additional changes to the prior year's COVID-19 policy?
Yes.
And what were those?
So we added some language around distance learning as we were preparing for opening schools in the fall of 2021, knowing that we would have to open fully and in person. But wanted to be able to provide a distance learning option for families. We were granted permission from the Rhode Island Department of Education to engage with a professional online learning provider to provide that option to families requiring it as an accommodation either out of their IEP or by the work plan, or for families who opted to engage in distance learning, but this would be a full-time commitment for the entire year. Other changes that were added included additions for extracurricular activities and sports. In the previous year, students were unable to engage in such activities, but anticipating that those activities would be open in the 2021 school year, added language to allow for the superintendent to develop protocols and procedures around students being able to engage in such activities for the incoming school year. And finally, I believe there were changes regarding visitors and volunteers to the schools. We were allowing visitors and volunteers for that school year, requiring them to wear a face mask and to show proof of vaccination.
So all of these changes that you described reflected the needed changes to return in person with the students in as safe way as possible.
Yes.
And regarding the distance learning, this was no longer a hybrid. This was an option to either do distance learning or not.
Yes. For this particular year, we needed to open fully and in person, and we weren't given the allowance to pivot from remote or hybrid or in person any longer. It had to be full in person for all of our schools.
Was the distance learning issue of significance based on your input from the community to many parents?
Yes, we were, at the time as we were preparing for the opening school, we were getting a lot of feedback from some parents who were wanting an employment option available.
Now, the face mask mandate at that point on August 19th, what was the status or what was your understanding of what the state was going to be requiring regarding face masks?
I don't recall the date of the governor's executive order around face masks in the state, but I know that that was sort of in flux, which prompted the school district to include that in our amended policy.
So without regard to what the governor did, the Barrington school policy subcommittee wanted to have in place a face mask mandate.
Yes, and we were taking direct guidance from the Department of Education and Department of Health at that time that were strongly recommending the use of face masks in schools.
How did you make the changes? Was this a virtual meeting, by the way?
This was a in-person meeting, I believe.
On August, okay. How did you make the changes at the meeting to this policy? What's the mechanics of it?
Sure. We generally house all our documents on a platform called Google Documents. As we go through all the policies listed on our agenda, we work in real time to add or make any revisions to the drafts throughout the meeting as we discuss them.
I'd like you to take a look at Exhibit H in your booklet, please. You have it there?
Yes.
Okay. Is this the draft that came out of the policy subcommittee meeting?
Yes.
And the yellow, I assume on your copy and the court's copy and others is yellow highlights, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what does the yellow highlight show?
The highlights reflect the changes in the policy from the previous year's policy, including changes that were provided in the draft and changes made at the subcommittee meeting.
So in every place where there's yellow, it reflects a change from the prior year's policy.
Yes.
Okay. Now, did the subcommittee recommend this policy for review at the next school committee meeting?
Yes.
And did this item appear on the next, did the amended review appear for the next subcommittee, next school committee meeting?
Yes, this draft was recommended by the policy subcommittee for first read at its August, I believe, 24th school committee meeting.
Okay. Now, I'd like to, that meeting on August 24th, I don't have in front of me the minutes or the agenda for that meeting, but this was one of many items on that agenda. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
In fact, that meeting was about 5 hours long.
Our meetings generally average 4 to 5 hours.
And I'd like you to take a look at Exhibit I. And we'll come back to Exhibit I, but when this item was introduced, did you make a brief comment to describe what the item was?
Yes, generally with all policies, in particular at that meeting, I introduced this policy as an amended version of our previous year's COVID-19 policy. And then it was read aloud by 2 members of our school committee, Erica Stevenson and Megan Douglas.
So word for word, the whole policy was read aloud?
Yes, that is our practice.
And who were the ones reading it out loud?
It was Erica Stevenson and our vice chair, Megan Douglas.
Okay. And were there any additional edits made to the draft that had been sent by the subcommittee at that August 24th meeting?
Yes, after the reading of the policy word for word at that meeting, I opened it up for discussion at the school committee level. And there were some minor edits made to the policy at the time.
Were there any edits of more substance that you can recollect?
There are a couple substantive changes. For example, the addition of allowing students who opted for the distance learning option to participate in graduation services. For students who, again, opted for the distance learning option, to limit their participation in extracurricular activities and sports, but just for the fall season, sort of with the understanding that that would be reviewed in future seasons.
And I noticed, if you turn to the third page of the policy, under visitors to schools and buildings, there were some amendments to that regarding what visitors and volunteers had to do if they entered the building. Can you explain that change?
Yes, it was with regards to showing proof of vaccination. We added that it would be for any visitors or volunteers attending meetings longer than 15 minutes.
Okay. So instead of requiring masks and vaccination for anyone who entered, you made it a 15-minute commitment. In other words, you had to be there 15 minutes or more before that constraint was imposed.
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you recall whether there was public comment at that meeting?
Yes.
And was there any public comment regarding the vaccine mandate?
No.
What was the public comment?
There were a couple of public comments made by members of the public regarding our face mask mandate.
And were these objections to the face mask mandate?
Yes.
Strong objections?
Yes.
And did the committee pass the policy on for the next reading, the second reading?
Yes. So the first read was moved to a second read on September 2nd, and the committee adopted the policy at that meeting.
So the policy went through the two readings, and then on September 2nd it was adopted in full.
Yes.
Do you recall on the September 2nd meeting whether there was any public comment regarding the vaccine mandate?
No, there was no public comment regarding the vaccine mandate.
What was the public comment that you can recollect?
There was public comment again around the face mask mandate.
Do you have information about how frequently this amended COVID-19 policy is accessed by the public?
Yes, as of mid-January of this year, the amended policy has been accessed around 100 times a month.
100 times.
Yes.
Now, moving on, Ms. Bay,
I'm sorry, before you move on, in Exhibit I, the yellow highlights, those are the changes at the first reading, is that right?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so why is it that when you posted this policy on the agenda, which I assume you did in concert with Superintendent Story, you did not feature the vaccine mandate?
Well, first of all, the policy was not just a vaccine mandate. It included other comparably important aspects, such as the face mask mandate, as noted by public comments, as well as other items such as the distance learning option that I know was of great interest to members of the public. And secondly, it would not be good practice to call out any particular aspect of the policy and noticing it on the agenda, and leaving that determination to either the school committee chair or the superintendent would be subjective, and as various stakeholders, members of the public or members of the rest of the school committee have different interests in different aspects of any given policy. Calling out certain aspects of it on an agenda could be considered misleading, especially to the public, and therefore subject to an Open Meetings Act violation.
So in this case, for example, the policy included vaccine and face mask mandates and changes to distance learning and changes to participation in extracurricular sports.
Yes, and changes to our visitor and volunteer policy.
And those issues would be of different significance depending upon which part of the public you were a part of.
Yes.
And what would be the impact of a decision to feature a particular aspect of a policy in a posting in your experience?
Objection. The impact, what does that mean? Impact on who?
I'll withdraw the question. Have you ever, in your experience working as the chair or participating on the Barrington School Committee, had a situation in which a particular feature of a policy was highlighted in a posting?
Objection, relevance.
Objection.
Objection, relevance. What other policy?
Give you some. You can answer.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
The stenographer doesn't mind.
Question, have you ever in your experience working as the chair or participating on the Barrington School Committee had a situation in which a particular feature of a policy was highlighted in a posting?
No.
Have you seen any school committee posting that features a particular aspect of a policy?
Objection, is that referring to the Barrington School Committee or any school committee in the state or it's vague, relevant?
Sustained. You can clarify.
I have no further questions.
Is it okay?
Wherever.
I'll go ahead.
You don't need to Google it all.
No. This Bay, I apologize if you testified to this, but I just want to clarify. What's your current employment status? Are you working?
Currently, I'm a state intern.
Do you have, what's your educational background?
I have a master's of education in regular education and special needs.
Before you chose to be a stay-at-home mom, were you working?
Yes.
So when was that?
The-
When was the last time you were working? outside the home?
Let's see, I have a daughter in 2007. So from 1999 through 2007.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not going to hold you to exactly.
Okay.
And were you teaching? Is that your
Yes.
second profession? This policy, this COVID policy revisions that were made in August of last year, your testimony was that there were task force meetings that came up with what was proposed to the subcommittee. Is that correct?
That's not entirely correct. The
Okay.
task force discussed how we would be opening schools in the fall of 2021 and discussing various aspects of what that would look like. And we were directed by the Department of Education to open fully and in person, which was a change from the previous year.
Do you know who was the person who first proposed to add a mandatory vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine requirement for all staff in the school? Do you know who that person was?
Objection, relevance.
Who ruled? You can answer.
I do not recall specifically who first proposed that vaccine mandate. I just know that it came up in discussion at the the task force, or at the task force and in discussion with Mr. Story.
I think you testified it was August 4th task force meeting. Were you at that meeting?
Yes,
Were any other school committee members at that meeting?
yes,
Who else was there on the school, from the school committee?
Megan Douglas.
So 2 of the 5 school committee members were at that meeting.
Yes.
Was that a public meeting?
No, this is a task force that is led by the superintendent.
Megan Douglas, she had a medical degree.
Yes, that is.
She's a pediatrician in town.
I believe she is a family medicine doctor, but not in town.
Did she bring up in this task force meeting the issue of mandating vaccines for staff?
No, she did not.
Okay, who at the meeting brought it up first?
Objection to states the testimony.
Well, I'll withdraw, I'll ask you different.
Withdraw.
The issue of mandating vaccines for all staff members came up at that August 14th task force meeting, correct?
We were discussing how to open schools safely. It was noted by union leadership at that meeting that teachers recognize the importance of having full in-person learning as much as possible, and recognizing that they would want to do it as safely as possible, and we're very supportive of measures to be taken, including a face mask, wearing face masks, and getting vaccinated.
But someone at that meeting mentioned there should be a requirement that all staff is vaccinated, and that should be added to the policy that was going to be discussed at the policy subcommittee meeting the following week or 2, right?
That was not explicitly stated at that meeting by any particular individual.
Well, how did, I'm sorry, I misunderstood then the testimony. I thought you said that at the policy subcommittee meeting, which was on August 19th, that the way that COVID policy revisions that were presented at that August 19th meeting came out of this task force meeting on August 4th.
So there were discussions at the task force meeting, and then discussions with directing, Mr. Story was going to be asking our legal counsel to provide a draft for the amendment of the existing COVID-19 policy. And in those discussions, a vaccine mandate was drafted into that policy.
Okay, I'm confused. Did the COVID vaccine requirement, was that decided at the task force meeting to tell Mr. Missouri to ask legal counsel to draft a policy that included a vaccine mandate for staff?
That was not directed to Mr. Missouri at the time.
Was it discussed at the task force meeting?
The idea of vaccination and the importance of it and the support for it for all of our
This
staff.
way, I'm going to object and ask.
Objecting, you just ran over the answer. That's what I did.
I'm
He's
moving this.
interrupting her.
I'm moving to strike her answer because it's not responsive to my question. She's done
Everyone's
everything.
interrupting each other, so neither one of you can object. It's not a clear record. But in any event, the first thing we would do is let her finish her answer. None of you?
I'm not sure you're on.
Why don't we be beginning of your answer?
Thank you.
Yeah, so the idea of vaccination and the importance of it and the support for it, well, do you want me to read the question now?
Sure.
Question, what is it you discussed at that task force meeting? And so the idea of vaccination and the importance of it and the support for it were all,
Yes, so at the task force meeting, it was the idea of vaccination, the importance aspects of it for the safety of our staff and for our students was discussed. As I mentioned earlier, union leadership was present and they discussed their support for taking whatever measures necessary to do in-person learning as safely as possible. There was no explicit statement or directive given at that task force meeting to ask Mr. Masori to put in a vaccine mandate specifically in the policy.
Was the topic of a vaccine mandate discussed at that task force meeting?
No,
It never came up at the task force meeting. The word mandate never came up.
the word mandate was not discussed.
Vaccine requirement for staff at that time.
No, the task force is working on protocols and how schools would be operating. They were not discussing policy specifically. That would be left to the policy subcommittee or members of the school committee. The task force is working on operations within the district. So we're looking at health and wellness protocols, how we're grouping students, how we're going to be doing extracurricular activities and sports, if that was going to be allowed, things like that.
Okay, so sometime then between August 4th and August 19th, somebody drafted a policy that amendment to the COVID policy requiring vaccines for staff, correct?
Yes,
Who drafted that policy?
our legal counsel,
Who told the legal counsel to draft that policy?
Mr. Masori.
Who told Mr. Masori to tell us, the legal counsel to draft this policy?
That was a decision between Mr. Masori and myself.
I'm sorry, say that again?
That was a decision between Mr. Masori and myself.
When was that decision made?
I can't recall the exact date.
So you had a meeting with Mr. Masori in which you discussed the vaccine mandate after August 4th and before August 19th?
We discussed drafting an amendment to the COVID-19 policy.
And that was between August 4th and August 19th?
Yes.
And it was just you and Mr. Masori, was anyone else there?
I don't recall it. I don't remember.
Let me ask you this, was this an in-person meeting, was it over the phone, was it by email, text message?
It would have been an in-person meeting.
Presumably at his office?
Yes.
And what prompted you to go to his office that day?
Your Honor, I am now going to propose, this is really the problem. We're talking about the notice in a particular agenda. Now he's trying to delve into whose idea was it? How is that connected to whether the notice is sufficient under the open?
Because he can't determine when it first comes up until he finds out when it first comes up, and that's when the notice starts maybe triggered, if at all. So the objection is overruled.
Thank you, ma'am. You need the question repeated?
Yes, please.
Please.
Question. And what prompted you to go to his office that day?
I often am in conversation with Mr. Masori about setting agendas for future meetings.
And who brought up the issue of a vaccine mandate at that meeting, you or Mr. Masori?
I can't recall.
Had you talked to someone else about including a vaccine mandate in the COVID policy before you went to Mr. Masori's office? You didn't talk to any other school committee members?
No.
Did you talk to any medical professionals?
No.
And so you went to this meeting and either you or Mr. Masori, you don't remember which of you, said, oh, by the way, we should include a vaccine mandate for staff in the policy.
That was not specifically what we discussed. We discussed needing an amendment to our existing COVID-19 policy and asking our legal counsel to provide a draft for upcoming policy subcommittee meetings.
Had you already had the draft policy from legal counsel when you met with Mr. Masori?
No.
But you're saying that there was a decision made at that meeting between you and Mr. Masori to include a vaccine mandate in the policy.
It may have been, I'm not entirely sure if it was explicitly as we were discussing various aspects of the policy that needed to be amended.
And again, you can't recall whether this was the first time you had a conversation with anyone in the school department, school committee members, administration, about adding a vaccine mandate to the policy.
I have objection, ask for answer.
I'm just trying to clarify.
Objection, ask.
One moment. Sustain.
Did Mr. Masori mention to you in this meeting that he had talked to anyone about adding a vaccine mandate to the policy?
No.
When the issue of the vaccine mandate came up at this meeting, did you think that was a good idea?
At which meeting?
With Mr. Masori, I'm sorry.
We didn't discuss specifically the vaccine mandate, so there was no discussion of the vaccine mandate explicitly or whether it was a good idea or not. It was just discussing what components would be added to amend our COVID-19 policy at the time.
I'm confused, Ms. Betty. I thought you said that the decision to add the vaccine mandate was made at this meeting between you and Mr. Masori. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You don't remember which of you recommended to make it the mandate in policy? You testified to that, correct?
Yes.
You don't recall Mr. Masori stating that he talked to some other people who thought it was a good idea to put the vaccine mandate in the policy?
Objection, ask for answer.
Sustain.
Again, I asked you if you thought at that meeting that adding the vaccine mandate was a good idea. And you
Objection, ask.
testified that you didn't talk about it, but now you just admitted you did talk about it. So I'm going to ask you again, when it came up at this meeting, whether you brought it up or Mr. Masori brought it up, did you think the vaccine mandate for staff was a good idea?
Objection, relevance.
What's that? What she thought was a good idea at that time.
Judge, I'm trying to get to the bottom of whose idea this was. I mean, so the vaccine mandate didn't just spring like a demon from Zeus's head. This was somebody's idea. I'm trying to find out whose idea it was.
I know, but that's different from asking whether she was in favor of it.
Well, if she was
at
in-
the time.
Okay, apologize, Judge, for interrupting. If she was in favor of it, maybe that will refresh her recollection that it was her idea.
Objection, relevance. Honestly, Your Honor.
Or whose idea it was.
Who cares? I mean, honestly, Your Honor, I know that the issue of the organics and how this came to be is of interest to Mr. Picciarelli. But bottom line is, what we're talking about is whether the notice was sufficient to apprise the community of the nature of the business to be discussed. Now he's going into whose idea it was, and did she think it was a good idea? Obviously, it got adopted by the committee, it got put on the agenda, and it was endorsed by all 5 members of the school committee, all of whom thought it was a good idea. How is that relevant to this meeting, to this very limited issue? I mean, this is really, really, really strange.
The question was what her opinion was with the vaccine mandate at that meeting with the superintendent. That objection is sustained. feel free to reply.
Well, let me approach it this way. Ms. Bay, do you think this vaccine mandate is important for the school department?
Yes, I do.
It's one of, would you say it's one of the most important decisions that you've made as a school committee member?
I would say it's one of the most important, but not the only important decision I made.
Fair enough. I think that, I'm going to distinguish it from, for example, the technology responsible use policy, and whatever that policy is, that's really not a big deal, right?
Oh, I think it's a very big deal for especially families and students who are very concerned about their privacy rights
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
regarding being recorded.
Fair enough. I can see a lot of policies that are important. But it is your testimony that the vaccine mandate for the staff was one of the most important. Not the most important, but one of the most important.
I would say it was comparably as important as other aspects of that policy, and the fact face mask mandate was also of importance to.
Right, but
Objection, he's done that a lot of
Wait
things.
a minute. The
Let her
stenographer-
finish.
I'm sorry if I...
Excuse me, the stenographer was trying to get the testimony, and you're both arguing with yourselves. I assure you that your objections aren't going to be in the record.
Sorry.
You will say.
Almost a minute.
I'm sorry, did I interrupt your answer? You got any questions?
I finished that meeting.
Okay. I apologize if I...
The objections are asked, I don't know where you were. She's already answered. Everybody's talking at the same time. Can't do that.
The mask policy is something that's dictated by Department of Health, Department of Ed, Governor's Executive Order, correct?
And it's dictated by currently the governor's executive order. The Department of Ed and the Department of Health are unable to mandate masks, is what I have been told, that they can strongly recommend it.
Well, no, there's actually an emergency regulation that the Department of Health has issued regarding requiring masks in schools, correct?
I'm not sure.
But I think it's attached as an exhibit, so you go, look right there. You're not aware of that? Okay, that's fine. If you're not aware, that's fine. Just you have to say yes or no for the record. You can't just shake your head, you have to say yes or no.
Could you repeat the question?
So are you aware that there is a Department of Health emergency regulation which require masking in schools?
Yes, I am now.
Okay, fair enough. And there are other mandates that come down from the state, whether it's from Department of Ed, Department of Health, Governor's executive orders. For example, in-person learning, that's a requirement from the Department of Ed, correct?
Yes.
So you don't have the option to develop a policy that allows for higher teaching this year. You have to follow Department of Ed regulations or requirements, correct?
Yes, I believe they do provide some flexibility for districts to tailor their plans to fit within their districts. That is why we create what they have deemed to be called the back-to-school plan, and we needed to submit it to the Department of Ed for approval.
There is no current requirement by any state agency, governor's office, state law, federal law, that requires teachers to have been vaccinated to teach in school, correct?
Objection. Objection, Rollins.
Overruled.
So that was a decision that Barrington made on its own without any requirement by anyone else, correct?
We were following the strong recommendations from the CDC and the Department of Health.
Is it your testimony that the CDC and the Rhode Island Department of Health recommended to the Barrington School Committee that you mandate vaccines for teachers?
That is not correct. I was referring to the CDC and the Department of Health strong recommendations that teachers especially be vaccinated.
Well, you understand the difference between a strong recommendation and a mandate, correct?
Yes.
In fact, with regards to masking in schools, originally, the Department of Health had said, strongly recommended that people in schools wear masks, and then that changed to a mandate, correct?
Yes.
And I got people, as you said, I got people upset. I'm sorry, can I interrupt again?
She answered the question with a yes, and you moved on.
Okay.
She was in, she said, but.
It was a yes or no question, overruled.
Thank you. And people were upset about, some people were upset, testified at the meeting, that you went from an optional, strongly recommended mask to required mask, right?
I'm sorry, who was?
You testified in public comment at these school committee meetings, people were upset that it was a mandatory mask.
Yes.
mandate, right? Now, did you or anybody in the school department make public pronouncements after the policy was enacted? That this vaccine mandate was very important decision that was made by the school committee?
No.
Well, you're aware that you're the only school district in the state at that time that mandated vaccines for staff, right?
Objection.
Overruled.
I was not aware of that at the time.
Did you check to see if any other school committees had enacted a similar policy before you enacted this one?
No.
And you were aware you were doing it solely on the authority as a school committee? You weren't being required to do it. You were aware of that, right?
Yes.
And you thought it was very important that you're potentially a leader in the state. You're the first district in the state that's going to mandate this. Maybe other districts will follow. That was important, wasn't it?
That is not how I approached it. No.
Are you surprised that the districts in the state haven't followed your lead?
Yes.
You wish they would, right?
I had thought they made policy.
I'm sorry, could you repeat this?
I had thought they made policy.
You had thought they may follow suit. Why did you think that?
Because of the strong recommendations from the CDC and the Rhode Department of Health, and the campaign from both Department of Education and Department of Health around vaccination at the time. And strong statements from teacher unions nationally as well as locally.
Was it curious to you that the State Department of Health or the State Department of Education or the governor was not mandating vaccines for teachers?
Objection, irrelevant.
Sustained.
Now, you testified previously and just now that the union was supportive of this mandate, correct?
Yes.
But they're not. They're not supportive of how you implement it, are they?
Objection, irrelevant.
Brought up in Ms. Masori's testimony, she mentioned, it's very important, they mentioned a number of times how supportive the union was about this.
Objection, irrelevant.
It's not quite accurate, I think I have the right to inquire about it.
Give you some one for us. Overruled.
So, it's true, Ms. Barry, that the union is not supportive of the way you went about implementing this policy, isn't it?
Objection, form.
Please rephrase.
Isn't it true that the union is not supportive of the way the school committee has implemented this vaccine?
I don't feel I can speak for the union. I can say that at the reentry task force meeting, union leadership stated support for staff getting vaccinated. I do understand that we also provided a draft of our policy before it was adopted to union leadership to ask for feedback from leadership on the implementation of those mandates, which resulted in MOU, or memorandum of agreement, that was signed September 9th, I believe. That also stated some stipulations around the implementation of those mandates, including use of KN95 masks or double masking until staff were able to get vaccinated by the November 1st deadline, as well as allowing them to use sick time if they were to have any reactions to the vaccine.
So if we're going to exhibit 12 in that book that we have there,
Need 12 to be opposite.
I'm sorry, A12. So defendants A, exhibit 12. So let me know when you have it in front of you.
Yes.
This is the MOU.
Yes.
Is there anywhere in this MOU that it says the union hereby agrees that the school committee may require staff to have a vaccine?
It does not.
You were present on August 28th when my clients appeared before the school committee on a pre-deprivation hearing, correct?
I think you meant to say October.
I'm sorry, October 28th, thank you.
Yes.
And there was a union attorney present at that time, right?
Yes.
Her name was Jennifer Adesabito,
Yes.
the lawyer for the NEARI.
Yes.
And she made a statement at that meeting, right?
Yes. No other question.
On behalf of these teachers, my plaintiffs.
She made it very clear she was making a statement on behalf of the union.
Okay. And she was objecting to the school committee terminating any staff member who refused to get a vaccine.
Objection.
Is that right?
I'm sorry, I'm going to propose a relevance objection.
Well,
It's like, it wasn't covered under the rec, it's not relevant. It really isn't relevant.
there's,
I went through this before, I just want to remind the court, the court wants to be, fair, but honestly, the issue of the termination, what the union's position was, is really.
I'm not sure where it goes, so I was gonna ask.
I'm sorry.
I don't understand the relevance either. Mr. Fisher?
Judge, I'm just trying to get to, there's been testimony like this witness and previous witness. The union was supportive of this, she mentioned a number of times, the task force meeting, the union was supportive of this. And again, it's not accurate. And I'm trying to get
I understand all of that, but now you're at the pre-termination hearing, several months later. And the statements that were made by the attorney then. So I'm not sure where you're going now. I understand where you were going before, but I'm not.
well, if the task force meeting determined at some point to require a vaccine mandate, this witness in the defense is trying to give you the impression that the union was supportive of the vaccine mandate. They say that a number of times in their testimony, not mine for us, in their direct. So I think it's very important that Your Honor understand that the union was not supportive of this. Not the implications of what happened here. And there's nothing in the record, there's nothing in the record, the MOA, minutes of any meeting, that says the union hereby agrees that teachers can be terminated unless they get the vaccine.
If I could.
So you inquired in some, was the union for it? She said, yes, the union was for it. Well, were they in favor of the way it was implemented? And I don't think you've gotten anywhere with that.
Well, so I'm
She
trying-
hasn't responded. And then now you're talking about pre-termination hearing months later. It's already implemented.
It hasn't been implemented yet.
That's right.
So I want to try to bring us back to the issue at hand. The reason that we put on evidence of the MOU, which was signed on September 9th, was to show that under and I said this at the last hearing, and I do feel it's relevant to repeat it. There are two issues. One is under Tanner, whether under the totality of the circumstances, the notice was sufficient to apprise the public of the nature of the business to be discussed. The second issue is under Edwards versus State, which is whether, even assuming, which we're not conceding, that there was a deficiency in the notice, whether the remedy should, what the remedy should be. And so we put on evidence in the affidavit through Mr. Missouri, which was questioned on, regarding the fact that the constituency that was most affected by the vaccine mandate, namely the teachers, had actual notice of it and an opportunity to impact Barrington. That's the point of it. It's not about whether they thought it was good or bad, but that there was awareness of it. And that circumscribed period of, August 19th, 2021, when the union was provided through its leadership at Philip with a copy of the policy, an explanation of it, and September 9th, when they signed the MOU with awareness that this was going to be adopted by the committee, is relevant. But how it was implemented and whether the union was happy with the implementation is really not relevant to the notice at the time. And it's also not relevant to the notice as it might pertain to remedy, because we're going into a period when not only does the union know it's happening, but knows that certain teachers are going to be facing consequence. I understand that it's interesting to get into this political discussion here, but it's...
No, I'm not here for getting into political discussions. And for my interest in that or lack of interest. Her understanding of problems concerning implementation and union support could go to remedy if the court reaches that point. Is there a question, Mr. Fitzgerald? Or beyond where the stenographer is, so if you want to start a new, or
I think the question has to do with the pre-termination
I
hearing.
can have her dig if you want.
But the agenda was the pre-termination hearing, and what the attorney, said about that. That was the question. Am I going to be allowed to get into that or not?
I assume there's going to be an objection, but it seems maybe if you could allow more foundation if you can provide more foundation as to the union's concerns about implementation. Is that the first time you suggested there was a problem with implementation?
Well, no one had been terminated by this because of this policy.
The policy had been implemented before, as I understand it. But I'm not trying to get in the way of your examination, so why don't you proceed and we'll see if there's an objection.
These three teachers, plaintiffs, they were the first teachers that the district recommended to be terminated for not following the vaccine policy, correct?
Well, they were recommended first to be placed on unpaid leave.
Placed on unpaid leave for 2 months and then terminated.
If they chose not to get vaccinated.
And these are the first staff members in the district that that recommendation was made, correct?
Yes.
So between September and the end of October, the union had no reason to object to someone being suspended and terminated for not following this policy, correct?
Relevance
Could you read the question out?
and foundation.
Question, so between September and the end of October, the union had no reason to object to someone being suspended and terminated for not following this policy, correct?
Assisting.
Since the November 1st date that was required in the policy for people with the vaccine, since that time, has the union filed grievances against the school department regarding the implementation of this policy?
I believe, there is a grievance in abeyance.
So they did file a grievance, but then they
I'm not entirely sure,
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of your answer?
Sure, I'm not entirely sure as far as the technicalities around grievances and abeyance, but if a grievance is in abeyance and that means that a grievance was filed, then, yeah.
Well, would you understand it this way, that they filed a grievance and then agreed to hold off on it?
I'm going to move to strike and object as irrelevant.
I'm just asking her to understand. She mentioned grievance and abeyance, I'm just asking her what her understanding of that
No,
term
your
is.
question was posed as if to instruct her. I don't quite think that's appropriate in cross-examination. If you want to ask her what she knows, that's fine. If you want to leave, obviously you're entitled to do that.
I'll just tell you.
I'm not really trying to, I'm not trying to.
I'll wait for her to look at that. Now lastly, you were asked questions about what good practice is in terms of posting policies on agendas. And your testimony was it wouldn't be good practice to call out specific items in policy. That was your testimony?
Yes.
So you think it's better the public not be aware of what the policy is going to do, what changes to the policy are going to be before you actually make the changes? Is that your testimony?
No, that is not correct.
So the public should know what the policy is about, whether there are being changes made to the policies, generally what those changes are being proposed. You think that the public should know that, right?
I believe when presenting a policy at an open public meeting of the school committee, that the full policy should be considered in its totality, as all aspects of a policy are considered important and more or less important to various stakeholders in the public and amongst the school committee.
I'm not talking about at the meeting itself, I'm talking about posting the agenda for the meeting. 48 hours before the meeting, the public has a right to know what's going to be discussed at that meeting. Whether to attend the meeting is what's going to be discussed, correct?
Yes.
So the public, so you understand that the public should be apprised of what's going to be discussed, and so that they can make that determination, that they're aware of the general nature of that discussion, right?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that this totality of the circumstances, the more important the issue, the more information the public should have about what's being proposed on the agenda?
Objection.
Would you agree with that?
Could you repeat that question?
I'll ask Mr. Rutherford.
Question. And would you agree with me that this totality of the circumstances, the more important the issue, the more information the public should have about what is being proposed on that agenda?
I guess the consideration would be what is considered to be the most important aspect of a given policy. And that would be a subjective determination that would have to be made by either the school committee chair or the superintendent in developing the agenda.
Well, you would agree with me that if you're making typographical corrections, comma splice, change from his to his and her, things like that, those are not important things that the public would really care about. But, I don't know, changing a policy to suddenly say that staff members are going to get fired for not taking the vaccine, that seems to be a little different, don't you think?
That was not specifically stated in our policy.
The policy that was presented on August 19th, Barrington did say staff members would be terminated if they didn't get the vaccine, except in certain circumstances. It did say that. That's why we're here. employees must be fully vaccinated by no later than November 1, subject to certain exemptions.
There's no mention of termination in there.
Well, what's the point of a mandate like that unless there's a punishment for not following it? You can't seriously think that this court is going to accept that, this thing. The clear implications of this policy were that if you didn't follow this, you'd be fired.
Questions and answers? There's no question.
I'm asking you a question. Isn't it true that the implications of this policy, the clear implication of this policy, is that if you don't follow it, you will be terminated? Why else have it?
Sorry, what's the last part here?
Why else have a policy that's saying you must be fully vaccinated unless you're going to enforce it somehow? Right?
Yes.
And the only way you can enforce it is if people refuse to follow it. You suspend them or fire them, right?
Yes.
So termination was absolutely the likely result of someone refusing to follow this policy, right?
That was not explicitly stated in the policy. That would be in how the implementation of the mandate would be carried out by the district.
I don't think so.
Is there any redirect I'm thinking about it for everything?
I might have a couple of questions, not many, but if you don't mind, I'd be grateful.
Think about it, and break that down.
All right.
Just like to remind you, so having previously this morning, watched the one over to the state.
Gina, G-I-N-A, last name is Bay, B-A-E.
Ms. Bay, would you turn to exhibit, attachment 9 to exhibit A, this orders affidavit? What is this document?
This looks like a document from the Department of Health.
Are these the regulations promulgated by the Department of Health regarding mandatory vaccinations for licensed healthcare workers?
Yes.
Did this regulation apply to some of the teachers in the Barrington School Department?
Yes, they would apply to school nurses, I believe, some of our providers of special ed services, such as speech and language pathologists.
Speech and language, psychological services. So anyone who held a license by the Department of Health had to be vaccinated by October 1st, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and some part of your teaching community is licensed by the Department of Health.
Yes.
And when you, and these regs issued August 17th, correct?
Yes.
So, looking at the constituents in the school community at the start of the school year, based on your experience working on the task force with Mr. Missouri and in the community, what was your understanding of the most important issue for teachers at the start of the school year?
Objection. The most important issue for teachers at the start of the school year, how is that relevant to the notice of the policy?
Under the totality of the circumstances, I'm trying to clarify what her understanding was, what was most important to the part of the public as the policy was adopted.
First of all, that wasn't brought up in direct examination, it wasn't brought up in cross-examination.
There's been a fair amount of conversation about the components of the policy and who cared most about which parts were adopted, and I'd like to clarify the issue regarding the importance to the teachers based on her understanding at the start of the school year.
That door opens, Judge. asked to it. I'm going to go back to all those other questions I asked.
I'm talking about the start of the school year when the policy was adopted.
I understand, but if you're going into a new or slightly new area on redirect, then he has a right to request.
I'm going to take you back to the policy, and I'll withdraw that line of questioning. Take you back to the policy that was adopted. What was your understanding of what was most important to parents at the time the policy was adopted?
Same objection, Your Honor.
This goes to the totality of the circumstances and the quality of the notice.
What was your understanding of the most important thing to parents?
When you adopt, let me rephrase it, Your Honor.
Okay.
There have been some questions about the nature of support for the policy by the various stakeholders in the community. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you have testified about the importance of communicating without featuring one piece of the policy, right?
Yes.
And you understood, based upon your work in the community, that different parts of the policy had different relevance to different parts of the community,
Yes.
which is why you didn't want to emphasize one part over another.
Objection, it's been very easy, Judge. The reason. She's telling
You've
you.
already stated as much on the cross, so if you could go on to the next question, please.
What was your understanding of what was the most important feature of the policy to parents?
Judge, the form of the question, what parents? Maybe some parents thought something, parents thought something else. Maybe they thought, some parents thought part of the policy was important, other parents thought part of the policies were important. How did they communicate that to this witness? It's just a completely inappropriate question.
It is totally appropriate. It goes to the crux of the issue. The
Well,
question-
most important or important at all. I mean, if we're only giving public notice to the most important issues, that's an interesting argument. If we're only giving public notice to important issues, that's a different argument. So you're asking now what's the most important issue. If the school's contention is that that's what you give notice on and nothing else,
That's not my argument, Your Honor, but I'll rephrase the question to attempt to clarify this. Would it be fair to say that the COVID policy that was amended and adopted on September 2nd included features that were of great importance in different ways to different parts of the community?
Yes.
And one part of the community that is of critical importance is the parent community. Fair?
Yes.
In fact, that's the public that lives in and resides in the town of Barrington.
Yes.
That's the public under the Open Meetings Act that you need to apprise of the nature of the business to be discussed. Correct?
Objection, that misstates the law, misstates the facts, they're irrelevant.
and it calls for legal conclusions sustainable.
What were parents communicating to you at the start of the school year? Were there concerns?
We were getting feedback from parents concerned about the option for distance learning being provided, as they were aware we would be opening schools fully and in person, and feedback around face mask use in the schools on either side of that issue.
What were the current concerns articulated by the teachers to the school committee and its administrative staff?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
What were the concerns communicated by the teachers to the school committee members and its administrative staff?
Most of their concerns centered around distance learning or hybrid instruction, really wanting to support opening schools fully and in person and not having to hybrid instruction as they had done in the previous year.
So the previous year, they had to do synchronous and asynchronous teaching, correct?
Yes.
Which is hard.
Yes, it's very challenging.
And made the prior year exhausting for teachers.
Yes.
So now that the commissioner was requiring that we return in person, the most important, or one of the most important concerns of teachers was to ensure that there wasn't hybrid continued.
Objection to the former question. Important, most important.
And we're also asking her about what teachers would think, so that's sustained. She's already talked about what was communicated to the schools.
Did teachers communicate to you a desire to not have to do distance learning?
Yes.
And so the option that you incorporated into the policy did not require Barrington teachers to do that distance teaching.
Objection, relevant, Your Honor. First of all, the prohibition on distance learning has already been established, which dictates by route, state regulation. Secondly, what's the possible relevance does that have to do with the vaccine community movement?
If I could answer that.
Sure.
I'm trying to illustrate that this policy included enormously significant issues, and that the vaccine mandate was not only not the most important, but perhaps of lesser importance to parts of the community than other features of the policy, which is why it would be misleading, if not illegal, to feature a feature of the policy that it was important to these plaintiffs to the exclusion of other features which were of more significance. That's my point. So if she can
But
explain.
does the Open Meetings Act talk about that, or does it talk about whether this is an issue of consequence?
Issue of
And it's an issue of consequence, and it's not just 3 teachers. I would imagine that there are other teachers who are in this situation, who may not want the vaccine, but got it. So you're just narrowing it to what's important to everybody else except these 3.
No, you're stating it inversely. What I'm saying is that the policy was included in it features that were important to many different constituencies. And as Ms. Bay testified, if she were to decide to highlight one feature of that policy and not the other, it would be misleading in that to parents and other constituents, other features of the policy were more important. This goes to the question of why you wouldn't draft a policy agenda or draft a notice that ticks off every single feature of the policy, because you can't anticipate and
Well,
determine.
don't do your answers. She has already testified concerning the misleading and subjective.
Okay, well, I'm trying to ask her questions about what her understanding was at the time as to what was most important to different parts of the community.
Okay. I don't think you asked that.
So the parental community is a major stakeholder that the community is to be responsive to, correct?
Yes.
And by definition, they live in Barrington.
Yes.
And what was your understanding of what was of major significance to the parents?
Again, I'm going to object as to the foundation. How would she know
I'll ask
what
the question.
parents,
I'll
what's important to different parents? I mean,
It's not what's important to the parents. The question was, what is her understanding of what was important to the parents? It's not the parents who place the ad.
Let me establish some foundation to clarify the point. Did you get feedback from parents as a school committee chair?
Yes.
Parents talk to you all the time about, they call you, they talk to you, you're in the meeting, right?
Yes.
Do you get mail, emails from parents?
We did receive emails as well.
And what was, from this experience of being a chair and receiving input from the community, what was your understanding from that as to what was most pressing on parental, what were the most pressing parental concerns as school was reopening this past fall?
Yes, so from what I was hearing, as far as feedback from community members and through our emails, there were two major concerns. One being the face mask mandate, and as I mentioned, there were concerns on either side of that.
Either side,
Either side, for or against the use of face masks in schools for their children.
strongly held views,
Very strongly held views.
and in fact, the comments, public comments, to the extent there was anything that touched upon the policy, was about the face mask mandate.
Yes, at the meetings, yes.
Okay. What else?
And then there were a number of families who still felt very uncomfortable with sending their children to full in-person school and learning, and were pleading with the school committee to offer a distance learning option.
Now, were the teachers and the teachers' union supportive of the idea of continuing to teach remotely?
No,
And the distance learning option that Barrington implemented and adopted through policy did not require Barrington teachers to teach.
Objection, Your Honor, we can move this.
I don't think I got that answer out.
How many times has been asked and answered that district learning is not, distance learning was no longer an option because of state regulation?
I think
What's the relevance to this? Your Honor, we're wasting a lot of time here on some irrelevant information.
I'd like to make a proffer that this Thank you. The distance learning that was offered lawfully under the policy did not require Barrington teachers to teach, is that correct?
yes,
And the Department of Ed sanctioned this limited option for distance learning, is that fair?
yes,
And this distance learning was of importance to parents because they didn't want their children to go back to school.
yes.
And were there a sizable number of parents who wanted this option?
There was a good number of parents that reached out, yes.
So by adopting this option and paying for it, Barrington was able to assist or respond to a parent concern.
Yes,
And it was distance learning for the whole year.
yes,
And that's reflected in the policy.
yes,
And would it also be fair to say that parents were very concerned about how sports and extracurriculars would be carried out?
yes,
And would it also be fair to say that teachers were very concerned about not having to do distance teaching?
yes,
And would you say that all those features of the policy were of equal concern?
yes.
On October 28th, at the hearing, the pre-termination hearing, Mr. Picciarelli read from or alluded to a statement made by Jennifer Azevedo.
Yes.
Was she representing these teachers?
Objection, Your Honor. I thought counsel objected to this line of questioning when you sustained it. I don't even think this is in the record. Why is she asking questions about it?
The chairperson just indicated that Ms. Acevedo made clear that she was only referencing the union's concerns at that meeting. I believe that was the response to your question. I believe this question is relevant.
Okay, I'll withdraw the question. I have nothing further.
So is it your testimony that mandating employees get a vaccine was not an important issue for the public?
That is incorrect.
So it was an important issue for the public.
It was one of the important issues.
And why was it an important issue for the public?
There were parents, as I mentioned, who were very
you said it was very important, parents, it was a very important issue. Parents were concerned about the safety of their children coming back to school in person, correct?
Could you repeat that?
Actually, she didn't, I don't want you to mislead her. She said it was one of the important issues.
It was one of the important issues parents had, was their children returning in-person teaching in a safe way, correct? And so when developing this policy, you took that important concern into consideration.
Yes.
And one of the ways you wanted to assure parents on this important issue was that you would mandate vaccines for all staff,
Along with the use of face masks
along with other things.
and distance learning options.
So it was important to communicate to the parents who were concerned about this important issue that you were going to address that concern in part by mandating employees have the vaccine. It's important that you communicated that back to parents, right?
That was one part.
Well, sorry, you're trying to give the impression, as I understood from your counsel's argument, that vaccine mandates were not as important as distance learning, as face masks in schools. Is that your testimony?
Objection. They were properly.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
They were comparably important, so for a number of families who were absolutely uncomfortable with returning to in-person learning, the distance learning option was of utmost importance to them.
But not all parents had the same concerns, right? I imagine there were a lot of parents who was very important that their children did return to in-person learning with no hybrid option, right?
Yes.
So there's parents on both sides of the issue, like probably everything else, right?
Yes.
But in your mind, the only important issue were those parents that were concerned about the safety of their children coming back, not those parents who were concerned about the deprivation that their children were having by distance learning.
No, that is not true.
And again, so your testimony is that because parents were concerned about returning, some parents were concerned about their children returning to school safely. That's why you came up with the vaccine mandate for employees, right?
That is not true. That is one of the considerations in putting in the vaccine mandate.
Okay, again, forgive me for not being quick, but one of the ways that you thought it was important to address some of these parents' concerns was to implement a vaccine mandate for employees, correct?
Yes, but the vaccine mandate, the primary rationale for that was the health and safety of our staff, as well as all of the students that would be attending schools.
How did you come to that conclusion yourself?
Objection.
How,
Objection. Relevance.
she just,
Questions withdrawn?
no.
Pursuant to Dana versus Beck, the court is very concerned about asking the legislature the reasons for their legislative actions. How did you come to that concern? What do you think are things that are questionable relevance here, but are matters which a legislator would have immunity, as well as certain administrators. But clearly, the court finds it to be legislative.
Sorry, you're right.
So the objection is sustained.
You're right. This whole redirect examination was based upon why she did certain things, was based upon what people thought was important.
Yes, she asked her why. How should he? That it was a testimony basis of her legal, other legislative decisions. Whether or not she considers it important is one thing. We've already got that. How she comes to some conclusions, I'm not sure that this branch is supposed to question what the legislative branch is doing. But that is that.
Well, let me ask you this question, Ms. Beck. Your staff are important members, stakeholders, as the terms we use in your community as well, right?
Yes.
Parents, teachers. And the issue of mandating something to an employee is, you would consider that important to those employees, wouldn't you?
Yes.
In fact, some employees mandating other employees to get a vaccine might be very important to them, right?
I suppose I can't speak on right now.
But did any employees make known to you that having a vaccine mandate in place would be important to them?
Objection.
Can you give me time here? You're talking about before the regulations are done.
Before the policy was done.
Thanks.
So union leadership did indicate their support and their willingness to work on getting their staff vaccinated.
So the union told you that they wanted a vaccine mandate?
They did not specifically use those words, but they said they were supportive of getting all of the staff vaccinated.
In that certain staff members refused to get vaccinated, that there would be consequences to that?
They did not discuss that at the time.
And they made these comments to you in the task force meeting?
Yes.
Was there any consideration of those employees who may not want to be vaccinated, may have objections, religious or otherwise, to being vaccinated?
Objection for.
Yeah, I just don't know whether or not she's talking about, whether or not it's mentioned at that meeting, whether or not she's thinking about it, whether or not the union's thinking about it.
Fair enough, I'll rephrase. Did any teachers or anyone communicate to you before the policy was adopted that some teachers might object to being forced to have a vaccine?
No.
I have nothing further.
Thank you. Okay, you're all set, you can shut down, thank you. And council, church, free food. You're able to do that, you don't go out there. You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. So that's, so we take it all in.
Oh, yours.
Okay, so on the record, we were trying to set a schedule, I asked them how long the witnesses were, and I think we're ready to set a briefing schedule, but first I should ensure on the record that each of you rest. So, defendant's case continues. Does the defendant rest?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, yes.
Thank you. And there's no rebuttal, correct?
Correct, no, please, Russ.
And therefore, the case is all set for testimony and the evidence is locked, although you should both review the clerk's exhibit to make sure we have everything in. So I'll leave the record open for that. And the clerk's going to set the briefing deadline at the end of business on the 18th. Assuming that the transcript can be Is all of that okay with you?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you for your work on this case. I